So our guest today is Jeff Vandrunen. Jeff, can you tell our listeners a bit more about yourself?
I sure can. Thank you. So, my name is Jeff Vandrunen. Thanks for the invite to the podcast today.
Yeah, you're
Uh,
welcome.
I'm the president of Serve Phyto Performance, as well as some supporting companies, one called Vandernan Farms and one called Phytochemicals. Describing myself, it's maybe best summed up as I'm part horticulturist with roots in agriculture, part engineer and scientist, and also a serious cycling enthusiast.
Well, we like all those on this show, for sure. Well, that's and just kind of off interview thus far is getting to know Jeff a little bit more, and he can tell the stories. Is a pretty interesting guy, and as you heard in our intro, I've got a storied tale of one of your products, Jeff, and we'll talk about that more in detail. But let's first learn more about your company, its vision, and some of the history of it. So, can you tell us what Sir is, what Vandern Farms is, and kind of more of what you're doing on a daily basis?
Yeah. Vandernan Farms was our start as a family agricultural business. So I started in the business right out of college, and we're located in Momence, Illinois, which is about 40 miles straight south of Chicago.
Okay.
And here in Momence, we grow and process conventional and organic fruits, vegetables, and culinary herbs on our farms here. And we harvest every day during the season, and then we freeze dry these ingredients to be used in items you'd find in the grocery store on the grocery store shelves. So you might have seen like a cereal with dried strawberries or blueberries, raspberries. Those might be some products that we produced here in our facilities, or possibly tried a pasta sauce or a pesto or a Mexican salsa that might contain our basil or cilantro. So yeah, we
Fascinating.
really got our start in the food ingredient business, and we're still doing that today.
Okay. Well, just out of curiosity, I mean, how would I know that the strawberries are coming from your farms? What other companies have you partnered with to do this, or
Yeah,
is it just
well,
so
you
far?
wouldn't know which brands contain our
Okay.
fruit, but a lot of the brands that you'll see on the grocery store shelves do contain our dried fruit. Yeah. So,
Interesting. Interesting.
yeah.
Okay. So, how did you spin off and get into phyto performance? Or am I saying
Yeah.
that? Yeah.
So Vandern Farms was the start. And
Okay.
then in the late 90s, we saw an opportunity to provide higher quality, basically dried fruit and vegetable ingredients to the dietary supplement industry. And at that time, it was kind of the age of herbals. So people were into St. John's wort and echinacea. But right
Yeah.
about that time, people were getting more and more knowledge about phytochemicals, especially from fruits and vegetables. And we had this very unique way to dry things with our freeze drying process, which is a way to preserve 100% of the phytonutrients in a product. So, for example, we even dry probiotics or living
Oh,
bacteria. And if you dry bacteria in a freeze dryer, they're still alive. All you do is add water to them and they come right back to life. And
yeah.
so we had a great drying system and great raw materials. And so we started a new company called Futureceuticals and
Okay.
started to provide a very high quality plant material concentrates and extracts standardized to specific phytonutrients or plant phytochemicals. So since those days in the late 90s, we've expanded to be kind of a premier ingredient inventor, discoverer for the dietary supplement industry. So that's how we shifted from being a commodity agricultural based business to more of a uh, discovery and manufacturer of dietary supplement ingredients. And from there, Serve Phyto Performance was born out of this Futureceuticals dietary supplement ingredient venture.
That's interesting, and thanks for providing that background. I think it's important for where we're going. But just out of curiosity, why? So You're all organic and all plant based. Is that correct?
Well, we do organic and conventional
Okay.
growing on our own farms, and we do supply organic and conventional products. But yes, we are certified organic in all of our production facilities and processes.
Okay.
But
And why plant based?
so that's a great question. And nature provides this treasure trove of powerful phytochemicals that in a lot of cases remain today undiscovered. And so the number of plant phytochemicals out there is just incredible. And all these natural compounds have some specific purpose in the plant. And many have an additional specific benefit for human biological systems. But the list is so long, and the time and energy needed to uh, even crack the chest is pretty substantial. But it's really an endless world to be discovered when you consider natural compounds found in plants and what positive effects they might have on human health. And everybody has a clue, hey, eating plants is good. But specifically, when you get down to the specific phytochemicals, we're really in the business of isolating those and trying to do the work to discover what are they going to do, what are they going to affect in a biological system, and it's just fascinating.
Hmm. Yeah, that is fascinating, my criticisms here as well is because of phytochemicals and what we're talking about. My peers and even some listeners may come in and be like, "Whoa, this is a little wonky, a little out there, Adam. This is a little different than what you usually talk about." But like you said, it's a treasure trove, and we're learning. I mean, daily. We're learning yearly. So, can you speak to maybe how you have gone about discovering the treasure trove, and what kind of motivates you to get into this futureceuticals, so to speak? Like, what drives you to do this?
Well, yeah, what drives us to do this is that we've seen in the studies that we've done, we have a discovery research center. And one of the things that we can do is today, with very sophisticated testing equipment, a person can take a food product and we can look at in real time changes in gene expression, every blood target and marker, changes in cytokine, chemokine panels, inflammation, you name it. So, if we, for example, give somebody a regular Coke and we start to monitor what changes happen in their body 15, 30, 45 minutes, an hour after they
Mhm.
consume a regular Coke, it's pretty profound what we can discover about the good and bad in consuming a regular Coca-Cola, and but we can do the same thing with plants, whole plants, and with plant extracts or concentrates that are highly concentrated in specific phytochemicals. So the beauty of this is that um, people might think, hey, spinach is good for you, but and it is good for you. It's filled with all kinds of nutritious things. But specifically, if you did an extract of a plant and then you administered that to a person and you could see what effects it has in real time after they consume it, you can get a lot of clues on what should happen if you actually studied this in a clinical setting, whether it's reducing cholesterol, or whether it's helping maintain blood glucose, or whether it's helping with specific markers of performance. By being able to look at this, real time in an acute setting, we can get very predictive and get a lot of clues on what these phytochemicals might actually do in the human body if we studied it on a larger population. And so we're kind of in this discovery research mode where we're looking at plant materials to find out which ones really have some interesting effects on humans.
Yeah, that is super cool. So I'm learning along with the listeners here. I'm going to be enlightened as we go, and where we're going is we're going to talk about betalains and your product called Alt Red, which is it derived from beetroot. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm a big fan of beetroot, as you know, and I'm a huge fanboy of Andy Beetroot Jones, which you've met and consulted with, right?
Yes, I have. I have.
Well, I'm very I have FOMO from that meeting, and hopefully he'll come on the podcast and we'll talk about some of this too. But before we get into alt red and betalains and what that actually does, I want to provide a quick overview of kind of what I know of this, and then we'll talk about like very specifically about what betalains are and kind of this treasure trove of performance, if you will. So just to remind the listeners, is when we're talking about a beetroot supplement, um, and Jeff, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but high level, beetroot contains nitrates, and dietary nitrate converts to nitric oxide in the body, which can promote vasodilation and increase oxygen to the working muscles. This can decrease perceived effort for a given effort pace or power, or it can also increase performance in various ways, just like those markers I talked about, all linked toward cardiovascular benefits. And that obviously is advantageous to the endurance athlete. High level, am I tracking correctly there, Jeff?
It's true. All the scientific studies on the consumption of beet juice and its effect on performance are exactly as you've just outlined.
Okay. And so, you know, like you said, these points are well established. There are, criticisms of beetroot and where the beets are coming from, how you're taking it, what you're doing. One thing that always blows people mind is, a lot of it is started to convert in the mouth. So the bacteria in the mouth as well as the gut helps to convert that into nitric oxide. And at some point, we'll maybe when we talk about or to Andy Jones, we can talk specifics on that. But from my understanding, betalains are not nitrates, and there's something different going on here in this treasure trove of red pigmented stuff, right?
That's true. And
Okay.
so, yeah, all the scientific studies that you've referenced are there. And, since betalains don't contain any nitrates, or alt red betalains don't contain any nitrates, one question, are the effects of beets um, due just to the presence of plant nitrates? Or is there something else in the beet that adds on to this effect or is part of the effect? It's very interesting to contemplate because when you look at the information from our studies, you have to ask that question.
You do. You do. And I'm going to ask you that question, but later on in this conversation. First, for our listeners who have no idea what we're talking about, can you tell us what alt red is and what the heck betalains are?
Sure.
Cool.
So first, what betalains are not. So just the term betalain gets a little confusing because there's some similar named compounds out there. So they're not plant nitrates. So this has nothing to do with plant nitrates in beets. It's not beta alanine. It's not betaine from beets. It's very specific phytochemical compound that's found in just a few places in nature. So it's the pigment in beets. And this pigment is a different pigment than what you'd find in, blueberries and raspberries and strawberries. It's found really just in beets, a few cactus plants, and a few flowers. So it's very rare in nature. So you would think, oh, the red color in beets, that must be everywhere. But no, it's not. And
Interesting.
it's just in a handful of plants that you'll find this substance.
And is it only in red beets or is it in like yellow beets as well? Or
So there's a red group of betalains called beta-cyanins. And
okay,
there's a yellow group of betalains called beta-xanthins, and both are found in beets. So
gotcha.
when you see a beet and you see the red color, you're only seeing the red color, but the yellow color is there side by side with it. It's just that the red color is drowning out the yellow color. And you might see, for example, a yellow beet in the grocery store. That's just a beet bred not to have any beta cyanins, only beta xanthins. And so a regular red beet is 50% red and 50% yellow. It's just that you can't see the yellow.
Well, my mind is already blown. This is fantastic. So I take it in alt red. We're just talking about the red pigments, or does that have both?
Oh, it's both. So this
Okay.
is actually a concentration of all the betalains, all the beta xanthins, and all the beta cyanins in the beet. And so we have both red and yellow color in the alt red betalains. But when you look at it, it looks red because, yeah, the red overpowers the yellow.
Okay. So we talked about what betalains are not. We're starting to describe what they are. So why, why does it make our bodies go better and go harder? Which we'll talk about that performance aspect. But why have there been curiosities of performance in these betaline pigment colors?
Yeah, this is where it starts to get interesting. So we noticed that nobody had done any work on betalains. So it was just like a white space out there in the scientific community. And we spent a lot of time trying to figure out, well, how can we actually extract or concentrate these betalains because it hadn't been done before. And at the same time, it was well known that betalains aren't very stable. And so, if you expose betalains to a low pH or extremely high pH, they start to break down easily. So they're a little bit fragile when you subject them to heat, for example, like just the process to make a canned beet or a beet juice. The betalains are damaged very easily in that process. The beet juice or the canned beets will still look red because it's a pretty powerful pigment, but they're actually damaged and a lot of them just are gone by the time, for example, a can of beets, they're pretty heavily destroyed. But we're the first company, and we spent years doing this, figuring out a process to extract and stabilize the betalains from red beets. And that was really the starting point of us being able to study the biological effects of the betalains in the human body. So it really started with a process to be able to extract and stabilize these betalains because that had never been done before.
So what made you what was the point at which you made a decision that hey, it's not just beets, it is something else? What made you go all in on betalains?
So we developed this process and we were able to produce our first few grams of the betalain extract, start to characterize that from taking a look at what spectrum of betalains were in there, because it's not just one betalain, it's a spectrum of different red and yellow betalains
Hmm.
in the beet. And we also noticed that as soon as the betalains were separated from the sugars, the fiber, and the plant material, and dried and extracted the way that we put the process together, that at that point in the dry form they were very stable, and so we realized that we had something kind of special because for the first time we could take a pure concentrated betalain material and take a look at what this stuff really can do in people. And that was a big step forward. And so we really just put it through our discovery research platform, and that's where the journey began.
Interesting. So you mentioned, and this was something that I was learning in my research here, um, is the fragility of betaleins from the processing, either it's exposure to light, exposure to oxygen, heat, this type of thing. With what you just described of your extraction process, and
Mhm.
you claiming that they are very stable in that form, how have you, and we're probably skipping ahead here a little bit, but is it stable in that form and in a pill form that you have, or what other considerations have you taken to make sure that it is stable from when it leaves your facility to where it comes down?
Yeah. So when we produced the product, I mean, initially we started doing shelf life tests on the product in a capsule in the same bottle that we're using today. And then
Hmm.
there's accelerated shelf life tests that you can do where you expose it to a high heat and high humidity to accelerate what would happen in real time. But since we've been working on this project for 12 years now, we've had plenty of time to do real time shelf life tests. And so in 48 months, we don't see a substantial degradation in the betalain content. So, I mean, a 24-month shelf life is the product's perfectly stable. Now, that's in the dry form in a capsule. As soon as you would take that, for example, if you took the capsule and put it in water, becomes very unstable. So if you were going to put this into a water bottle, you should probably drink the water bottle in an hour. Um, and
Yeah. Got
the betalains will be destroyed probably by the next morning. So they start to degrade very fast in a liquid solution. And we have done some work, looking at stability and gels and that kind of thing. But the color's so intense. If you take a betalain gel, your mouth will look a little bit scary. The color pigment is very powerful.
Okay, well, I won't do that. Um, okay, so we're gonna get into well, let's kind of like swing back a little high level because it is all about this performance, right? That's why you created the product. And that's why we're talking about here on this podcast. We've got some research that we will go a little bit deeper into, but in general, you're making athletes faster by using this product. Now, what makes alt red different than some other products out there in terms of like the betalains that you're using
Yeah.
or how much it's in there or what's the difference?
Well, as we were talking about, we figured out how to concentrate this, and we actually came up with a product that's a 25% betalain pure concentration, stripped. It's betalains that are stripped of sugars, nitrates, beet fibers. So basically, we have a process where we can just grab the betalains out of the beets, and they're outside of the normal matrix that you'd find them in the beet plant or in a beet juice. And just to explain it a little more, when we started this project, again, there was very little scientific interest in betalains and beets for that matter. This was even before really the first clinical studies came out on beet juice. And right when we started this project, that's when everybody got interested in beets, which was interesting. But we had
Mhm.
indications from our early studies that these betalains were very active in biological systems, and we thought possibly this was another phytochemical hidden in plain sight. So we started to put some
Mhm.
work into it, and then we had when we produced this first material at 25%, this would be the equivalent of a 200 times concentration. So it would take 200 pounds of beets to make 1 pound of our 25% material. So it's pretty highly concentrated material. And then
Gotcha.
another thing that, we had studied quite a bit on was the fact that betalains were very poorly bioavailable. So it's hard for the body to absorb betalains.
What do you mean by bioavailable?
So you can consume a product that contains any kind of plant polyphenol or phytochemical, but that doesn't mean that. I mean, you might have heard stories about, you can take too many vitamins, but that doesn't mean your body's going to absorb all the
Yeah,
vitamins that you
exactly.
consume. They're not really bioavailable. Your body will take in a few of them, but anything over that, you're basically just going to pee them out. So, um, bioavailability is really how much of a product that you take orally into your system is then actually going to get, in this case, into your blood. So, if it just goes into your stomach and then you excrete it somehow, you can consume a product, but that doesn't mean that it's actually going to be available for use in your body. Those are two totally different things. And so, what we did is we knew that there was this issue with betalains.
Yeah.
And we confirmed that once we separate the betalains from this native plant matrix, the bioavailability, the ability of people to absorb the betalains increased dramatically. And so it was about a 10x increase in the amount of betalains that's absorbed into the body. So we did some bioavailability studies, which basically means you give a person beet juice or whole beets or uh, the alt red betalain extract, and then you look at what percentage of the betalains they consumed actually shows up in the blood. So we can actually take a sample of people's blood, measure the betalain content in their blood. And in the studies we did, it's about a 10x factor as far as how much betalain is absorbed. Once it's separated and concentrated from the plant matrix, they become very bioavailable. So, one of the things we kind of talk about is it's derived from beets, but it's difficult to get from beets, the
Yeah.
actual betalain molecule.
Got it. Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense on the bioavailability, especially when you're stripping it down and allowing the body to just purely absorb without and getting rid of the rest of that stuff. So, do we still see some people who maybe can't metabolize just pure betalains, or is everybody just going to have a response to this?
That's an interesting question. Um, they estimate about 14% of the population has bituria, meaning the inability to metabolize and process betalains. And so there's certain people,
And beets, right?
yeah, and beets. So
Yeah.
there's certain people, if they eat beets, it shoots right through them and they're peeing a stream of red, which is, again, very frightening. When you see that, you're wondering what's going wrong. And yeah, it's estimated about 14% of the population has this. Sometimes it's due to having a low iron levels. So it
Yeah.
can be an indication that you're low on iron, but not always. And the interesting thing is that with the Betalain product, I
Hmm.
mean, it's extremely rare that we have anyone who would report bituria. There may have been a few over the years who've experienced it. And I don't know if they were taking the product alongside with some other beet product, but it appears that at the dosage that we're giving and with the bioavailability of these betalains, we don't see bituria from anyone. So it's another indication that something's changed as far as the body's ability, to assimilate this material.
Yeah, that is really interesting, because I do know some athletes, and it's even happened to myself, with bacteria. Is that how you say it?
Yeah,
Bacteria, yeah.
yeah,
Where have experienced that. Without red, I have not. And other beet products that I'm currently taking, I haven't either. So
yeah.
either I'm not the 14%, or the bioavailability is just so high.
Hard to say. Yeah.
Hard to say. Hard to say. Um, so, kind of bring it back here so our listeners don't get lost with us in our nerdy scientific stuff that we're talking about. What effects are we really purporting here with betalains? Like, if you take it, what can an athlete expect?
Okay. So I could tell you what we know about beta lanes and what we've learned from our studies on beta lanes, maybe first, and then we can go into what we've actually found in our clinicals.
Yeah,
Um,
let's start there, and then we'll just kind of riff
yeah.
it from there.
So, earlier, Adam, you talked about nitric oxide and the cardio benefits of nitric oxide increases.
Hmm.
And really, there's two methods by which beta lanes work, two main methods. I'll call it nitric oxide as one pathway, and the other pathway would be oxidative stress as the two main mechanisms that beta lanes can affect performance and recovery. And the interesting thing is that our bodies are able to produce their own nitric oxide. So we
Hmm.
don't, you know, our bodies are very efficient at making nitric oxide. Um, the interesting thing about the betalain consumption is that it stimulates our body to produce more nitric oxide, but in a very unique way. And so, one aspect of beets is the dietary nitrates, but this product doesn't contain any nitrates and it still stimulates your body to produce its own nitric oxide. So that's interesting.
Hmm.
And it turns out, I mean, we've spent a lot of time working on this. It turns out that betalains stimulate production of a stable form of nitric oxide called nitrosylated hemoglobin. And so hemoglobin normally picks up two oxygens and
Hmm.
circulates those through, and that's the oxygen your muscles actually need to, you know.
That's interesting.
But with nitrosylated hemoglobin, this is when a few of your hemoglobins will pick up a nitric oxide
Hmm.
instead of an oxygen. So they'll have one oxygen and one nitric oxide attached to it. And it turns out that these betalains stimulate the production of this nitrosylated hemoglobin. And it takes about an hour or two after you consume the product for your nitrosylated hemoglobin level to go up. And the other interesting thing is, your body's making nitric oxide all the time, but nitric oxide in the body has a very short half-life. It's less than a second, free nitric oxide, and it's gone. So it makes it and consumes it immediately. But in this complex form with hemoglobin, the half-life of this nitrosylated hemoglobin is up to 6 hours. So, I mean, it's very long life nitric oxide attached to hemoglobin that's circulating through your body kind of as a signaling mechanism to deliver vasodilation to a place where it's needed. Um, that's the mechanism by which this nitrosylated hemoglobin works. So, what,
Yeah, that is. Yeah, keep going. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt the flow.
so your body can actually produce its own nitrosylated hemoglobin, and it does that. Everybody's body can do it. It does it all the time, but it won't do it unless it's due to some localized decrease in muscle oxygen saturation. So when you get into a
Uh,
hypoxic state, your
mhm.
body is going to start to produce its own nitric oxide, and a lot of this will be in the form of nitrosylated hemoglobin. So, for example, if you're doing a hard effort, you're
Mhm.
obviously going to have muscles that the oxygen level starts to drip down on, and your body's going to start to react to that and try to counteract that by increasing dilation to those muscles that are starved for oxygen. And the way it does this is through nitrosylated hemoglobin. But it takes some time, and you have to get into this hypoxic state
Right.
before it's going to do that.
Yep. And that's actually well cited in Andy Jones's research. I'll see if I'll try to find the one that I was reading and listening to this past weekend. But that's exactly what he's talking about in terms of there needs to be, you know, um, basically enough anaerobic stress in order to make that occur within the body. But it seems like kind of coming back to betalains, they're able to kind of be that catalyst in a more stable way. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, yeah. So if let's say that you go into an exercise or an effort, and you're actually preloaded with nitrosylated hemoglobin, that's really
Hmm.
what we're talking about here.
Hmm.
Before you perform, I mean, that's going to have a dramatic effect on your performance because it's
Yeah.
almost like your body's primed or preloaded for the exercise that hasn't happened yet. And so, as soon as you go into that low oxygen state, this nitrosylated hemoglobin signaling mechanism is going to kick right into action. And so, that's a big part of how this works. And we know that, it takes about an hour or two to kind of peak with your nitrosylated hemoglobin after you consume alt red, which is what we look at. And this is a very stable form of nitric oxide. So it's easy to measure um, from the standpoint, it doesn't disappear. So a lot of times on the study, they have a little bit of a harder time on the studies where they're looking at nitric oxide from nitrates because basically you're consuming nitrates, but then what they're actually checking for in your blood is nitrates. And
Hmm.
so they're not directly measuring nitric oxide. They're measuring nitrates after you consume nitrates. So it's a little bit tricky
Interesting.
to
Hmm.
understand, how much nitric oxide was actually produced. But in this case,
Hmm.
we can actually measure it because this is a stable form of nitric oxide, if that makes any sense. And takes about 2 hours, 1 to 2 hours, and then it's going to drop off over the next 3 to 4 hours. And so it peaks in at the 2 hour mark, and then it starts to tail off over the next 4 hours, the level of or nitrosylated hemoglobin that's produced by your body. And this is what we call endogenous production. So it's just
Hmm.
stimulating your body to make something it can make on its own.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And we'll talk about how to use this product here in just a minute. But with your description of nitrosylated hemoglobin spiking and being basically you're setting the stage for some very good performance to happen. I mean, uh, you guys make some pretty bold claims. Do you want to talk about those claims from some of the clinical research and basically what I grabbed off your guys' website?
Sure, sure.
Okay.
Happy to do that. So, yeah, I mean, some of the highlights from our studies, we've completed 3 clinical studies on actual athletes doing athletic performance. We have other
Hmm.
studies where it's not in a performance setting. But yeah, some of the highlights, for cyclists, the average increase in wattage, uh, alt red versus non alt red, is about 3.5% on average. Runners, like
Like in a time trial format, or
time trial format. Yep.
okay, yep, yep.
Runners, same thing, time trial format, like a 10K all out time trial, pretty much 3% faster across the board. Another interesting thing is that when they're putting out more watts in a cyclist setting or more speed for a runner, um, doing a survey of the group, they all felt like they had less exertion. So there's a
Hmm.
15% reduction in perceived exertion by the people that were participating in these studies, which is pretty shocking. So they're actually putting out more, but they're not feeling like their body is suffering as much, which is an interesting observation.
It's a very interesting observation, a very important aspect to note. I was just looking up the cycling study, and it was a 30-minute time trial,
Yeah,
in particular.
yeah,
But yeah, in reading these three research articles, the perceived effort was notable in all of them. In conjunction with the actual increase of performance, the perceived effort always coming down. So anyway, sorry.
yeah. So that was
Keep
a
going.
very interesting observation.
Hmm.
Obviously, if you're putting out more work, you
Hmm.
you shouldn't feel like you're putting out less work.
Precisely. That's why I bring it up. Yep.
And another interesting thing is that, we saw a 9% reduction in markers of muscle damage. So as your
Yep.
muscles are damaged, which in a lot of situations can be a good thing, it can be a good thing and a bad thing.
Right.
But there was a reduction in muscle damage, and that muscle damage is products released from the muscle cells when they're damaged. So we can measure that. And then there was also 14% less lactate production in the alt red group versus the control group, effectively, increasing your lactate threshold. And again, when we talk about muscle damage and lactate threshold, lactic acid production, lactic acid production can be good, muscle damage
Right.
can be good, but in this case, you're doing it at a higher level. So it is kind of a tool to allow your body to perform at a higher level um, without getting to the point where you hit that lactic acid threshold or your muscles start to get damaged. So it's very interesting results that um, we found in these studies.
It is interesting, and I'm glad you brought up the point that it's like, okay, it is interesting. There's a time and place for this, because that's exactly where my mind goes. Because it's like, I don't always want that, right?
Right.
And so I think this will transition into how do we take this. But I'm guessing you would agree with me that if I go out on I don't know, a 2 hours zone two endurance ride, I don't necessarily need to pop a bunch of alt red before I go do that. Is that correct?
That's correct. You don't necessarily need to do that.
Okay. So how would you suggest taking this? Like, what are the key days where we would take alt red, and kind of pre, during, and post, if it applies? What do you recommend?
Yeah. So, one of the questions that people have often is, do I have to load with this stuff? Do I have to take it for a week? So we've noticed that in all these studies, and just with people um, that take it for the first time, that many of the people notice the effect the very first time they take it. So if they take it 1 to 2 hours before an event, not preloading previous to that, they actually report, "Hey, I felt a lot better. I wrote a lot stronger." And so the preloading isn't, necessary um, at all. So
Hmm.
you'll feel it the first time you take it if you're a responder to this. That being said, a lot of people use alt red as a training tool in their daily training to help with daily performance and recovery. Again, it depends where you're at and what you're trying to accomplish. But a tool to make incremental gains over time is another way that some people use it. So they want to push themselves in their training program, both their training and their recovery program, to kind of push a little harder on those hard training days, recover a little better. So kind of push their body past the limit that they would normally be able to get to, and then
Yep.
back off and recover, do the same thing on some kind of cadence. So it really depends on, what kind of program you are, what your goals are, and what you're trying to accomplish. But it can be taken just on the day of an event, and you'll definitely feel the effects if you're a responder to betalains. Or you can use it on a daily basis as far as your daily, training and recovery. So it's really very athlete specific on how you might want to use it. But I view it as a tool, and you have to decide how you want to use the tools in your toolbox.
Yeah, very much so agreed. And actually, the one of the previous episodes I did, we were talking about this event that I did down in Asheville. It was a BWR event, and I rode with one of the guys at Super Sapiens, and so we had a great day of riding bikes. But I just felt great the entire time, and I had taken the alt red and was going. But the very final 8 mile climb, and again, sorry listeners for you to hear this story yet again, but I did like explode because like I hadn't so I had taken alt red, like think I'd taken one before and then like one during, and we're talking like a 5 hour event.
Yeah,
And when you do more mechanical work than you've ever done before, that's still a very high stress to the body. And when you're somebody like me who maybe like skips out on their volume from time to time, I just couldn't handle all that load on the day. So I just started to go way backwards on the final hill climb. So it's not like this stuff makes you impervious, but and this can even happen. I've seen this happen to my athletes in a really good taper, or if they come down from altitude. At some point there's these checks and balances mechanically for your body not to do too much.
right.
So in that particular case, is the reason why I bring it up is, even though you may have another cool tool in the tool chest here with alt red, you still have physiological limits. That does
Everybody
happen.
does. Yes.
Everybody does. Yeah. So we're not over promising here. However, I think the bottle says take one like an hour before, and then one every 1 to 2 hours during exercise if you want the effect. Is that correct?
If you're going to go on a longer training period or a competitive event, you
Mhm.
can take, up to 3 or 4 of them during a 4 or 5 hour ordeal like the Belgian waffle ride, and
Yep.
it will you will feel the effects. But normally, on a normal day, people will take it, an hour or two before their workout, and
Yep.
then save this extra dose until you're actually going to do a longer effort, and um,
Yeah. And
that's what I do personally.
okay. And I'll pose the question to you, and I'll bring this up because I asked this to Jackie, the original person I met through Sir, who's an ultra runner. But I asked her, is there any detriment to long term use or just taking a bunch of it? And she said that she did an ultra. I think she ran for 12 hours total, and she did one every 1 to 2 hours. No issue. But speaking to the master here, I mean, any detriment to long term use or overusing?
Well, the one nice thing is it's a natural product, and something that is found in nature and your body can metabolize. And so we don't have any reports or evidence that over a longer time period there's been any negative or detrimental effects. So the nice thing is that it is all natural, and it is a product that your body is built to metabolize. And so we don't know of any negative effects from taking the product on a daily basis. And there's certainly no negative effects from taking, you know, 3 or 4 capsules over the course of, 4 or 5 hours.
Gotcha. Okay.
We're talking about, it's interesting because we're actually talking about a very low dose of these betalains that are bioavailable. So in each capsule, there's 12.5 milligrams of betalains, which
Okay.
that's a very small amount of material to see an effect
Hmm.
like this.
Yep. Yeah, that's good to know. That's good to know. Um, well, let's talk about some criticisms, if you will. I mean, um, I feel like just in terms of balancing this out and taking my bias away from this, um, is kind of coming back to what I know or what we know a lot in research with some of the beetroot products is it seems like for elite athletes or somebody who is perpetuated with beat supplementation, there may be a point or just individuals that don't respond to beetroot product. Is betalain the same thing in that regard? Responders versus non-responders?
That's an interesting question because it's not something that's talked about very often, but I don't know of any product, whether it's a supplement or a drug, where 100% of the people respond. And it's not something you hear too much about when people are talking about their clinical studies, or
Yeah, good
where,
point. Good point. Yep.
whether it's a drug or a supplement. But there's always people who respond, and there's always people who don't respond. And it just depends on how your body's built and what it's built for. And so it's always important to remember with any supplement that whatever claims are made and whatever slick marketing there is, you may or may not respond to it. So just just because you read the results, everyone is not a responder to everything, and that's really good to
Yep.
keep in mind. So there are people who respond very well the first time they take it, and we do get people who report like, "Hey, I just don't feel anything when I take this product," and so we always have to acknowledge that there's going to be not responders and non-responders to every product out there.
Sure. And is there any, have you heard or seen this in the research, any sort of plateau with betalains? Like, meaning, okay, I've taken this for, I don't know, 3 months, I've taken this for 3 years now, and I'm not feeling the effects anymore. Any cycling in and out of this product that is necessary?
We haven't seen any of that. I've been taking it myself for probably the last 10 years. And again, I don't know what would happen if you took, 4 capsules a day every day.
Right.
maybe
Right.
maybe you would build up a tolerance, or maybe your body wouldn't respond anymore. I'm not sure. But I mean, the typical athlete that's using alt red is really taking it, probably on average every other day. There might be a few people who take it every day for their training, um, or they wait until they do their longer weekend rides, something like that. So we haven't noticed anybody coming back and saying, "Hey, this used to work for me and it doesn't work anymore."
Gotcha. Okay.
But we've
Well,
never studied that in a clinical study. So
okay. Yeah, good to know. So my last critical question is if you're one of our listeners right now, and you may be thinking, well, this sounds too good to be true. Jeff, what would you say to that listener that's like, I'm a little skeptical here?
if it sounds too good to be true, it is. There's no magic pill. There's no substitute for putting in the work, eating well, sleeping well, everything you need to do to perform. So you need to view alt red as a training tool, something that'll assist you in your training, depending what your goals are. You have to consider whether you're, like you said, a responder or not responder. And so many people report that it helps them train at a high level and a higher level, and able to push themselves further than they would be able to push themselves without it. But all you really can do is put it to the test, and like
Yeah.
we said, there might be people who respond super well and others who don't respond at all. But there's no magic in a pill, and there's no way around the hard work and proper nutrition and sleep. So if it sounds too good to be true, it is.
Man, I'm really glad you said that because I've had really good days taking this stuff, but I've had really good days not taking this stuff. And in particular, there's one hard training day where it's like I had a couple of hard training days in a row. I didn't sleep too good those days. I went out for another hard group ride. I did some alt red, and I was like, man, there is no amount of alt red or I don't know, amp human PR lotion or whatever that can like pull me out of this funk right now. And it's just I gotta go
Right,
home.
right.
Right. So fatigue still occurs. We still have limitations. So I'm glad you brought that up. Wow. So we went on a pretty deep dive here with alt red. Jeff, do we still have some time to talk about your other product?
Sure.
Immunity? Okay.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. Well, we'll probably skim a little bit more high level on this just in the nature of time, but I think for our listeners, it'll be good and informative to hear about your immunity product. So, could you tell us a bit more of what it is, or perhaps, like already, maybe we start with what it isn't?
Sure. Yeah. So this is a product called Sur Immunity, and as you know, every living plant and animal undergoes oxidative stress during respiration. This causes, free radicals to be produced or unpaired electrons to be released, and they have to be neutralized by your body. And your body makes its own antioxidants to neutralize these, as well as relies on exogenous or external antioxidants to help combat this. And so, even during exercise, it's interesting. Your mitochondria really release a lot of free radicals, and I mean, without proper nutrition and a way to, um, you know, get rid of those free radicals in an efficient way, you lose a lot of efficiency even in the powerhouses of your muscles due to oxidative stress during exercise.
So, real quick, Jeff, what does the free radicals or the unpaired electrons do? What is the negative that we're talking about?
So basically, they damage cells. They cause inflammation. They stop enzymatic reactions from happening. So, I mean, if we go back to athletes, mitochondria, they
Hmm.
produce ATP. That's where we get our power from. That's our
Yep.
energy.
Hmm.
And as soon as you have free radicals produced in the mitochondria, if they're not removed immediately, I mean, basically your ATPase doesn't work properly. And
Right.
so you can't actually even convert an ATP as fast as you did before.
Right.
And so it's basically like bad exhaust coming out of a, you know,
That's a good analogy. Yeah.
gasoline burning engine, and
Mhm.
you don't want it being pumped right back into the cab of the car because everybody's going to die. So you have to get rid of the exhaust and neutralize it as fast as it's produced.
Good analogy. So, all right. So, good lesson on free radicals and what happens there. So, what does immunity do for us?
So immunity, it's interesting. We spent a lot of time looking at this treasure trove of phytochemicals, and one of the things that we kept running into in our discovery research was that if we start out with a small amount of a phytochemical, it had really strong antioxidant properties. And as we increase the dosage of that phytochemical, that activity decreased pretty quickly. And once we got over a certain threshold, every single one of these antioxidants turned into a prooxidant. And so, an overdose of antioxidants, what's touted to be healthy, actually turns into a prooxidant and causes your body to produce free radicals. And this happens over and over again in everything that we
Mhm.
study. So, I mean, it might be just the society we live in, but, if a little is good, more is better. And actually, the way nature intended things to be, a little bit of a lot of different phytochemicals in this case is very effective. But a large dose of all these different phytochemicals, or any one, actually, it's even worse if you pick one in particular. That's the worst scenario.
Oh,
Um,
really?
it actually becomes a prooxidant. Yeah. So that's
Yeah.
that's how we got started in this.
Yeah. That's interesting. But I say on a very regular basis, like everything is bell curves and thresholds.
Right.
There's always some sort of tipping point.
Right.
Always. Yeah. Okay, so you dove into the treasure troves. You found this bell curve or this threshold aspect of antioxidants and prooxidants. So, how did you decide what goes in immunity, what is in immunity, and why did you decide to produce it?
Yes, we wanted a broad spectrum of different phytochemicals. So we really knew that a small amount of each of these phytochemicals is important and a large dose is detrimental. And so we did a process of screening different plant based phytochemicals for their ability um, to attack different groups of free radicals. There's quite a bit of different groups of free radicals that you can look at. And so we found the strongest ones that were effective at the lowest doses. And then what we did is, um, there's very few antioxidants that have actually been tested, none that I know of, for their actual activity in real time in people. So normally an antioxidant is viewed as it has the potential. So it's kind of a test tube test. You take a product, vitamin C, you put it in
Yeah, I
a
was gonna say
test tube,
vitamin
and
C.
you could see what its potential antioxidant free radical quenching ability would be if you absorbed it all and it actually worked in your body.
Hmm.
But nobody ever did a study where they were looking at the the actual level of free radicals in real time after you take a product. So we did some experiments with these individual phytochemicals and tried to find the minimum effective dose of these different phytochemicals. Then we combined these and actually studied these in people in real time. And the results were pretty profound. And this is a small dosage of, it's a little over 400 different phytochemicals in there. And the ability to affect the level of free radicals in the body in real time was really strong. And so we saw, a 20% reduction in reactive oxygen species in the blood after people consume this product, a
Interesting.
34% reduction in inflammatory response after they took the product, and a 42% reduction in mitochondrial reactive oxygen species. And so it was a pretty dramatic effect with a very low dose of a wide variety of different plant polyphenols. These are all
Hmm.
polyphenols, and their ability to work in concert, kind of like the way nature intended. I mean, eating a little bit of a lot of different things, um, grazing all day long.
Yeah, I was just about to ask. I mean, I am not an expert in phytochemicals, nor do I claim or pose myself to be. But from what I understand of reading, this was several years ago from phytochemicals. It is not even, and you alluded to this. It's not one. It can be multiple and many, but it's also the synergy of them together. Is
Right.
that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So, if the only thing you eat is, rabbits, you're probably not going to be healthy. If the only thing you eat is spinach,
Right.
you're probably not going to be very healthy. I mean, you
Yeah.
need a
Right.
variety of
Varieties of
different
plants alone.
nutrition and different phytochemicals. And why would they be in all these plants?
Hmm.
Well, the reason is because we need a lot of different ones, not all the same one every day, and certainly not necessarily, a hyper concentrated one.
Yeah. So, curiosity questions and perhaps some criticisms here on immunity. Who did you develop the product for? What type of person or athlete?
hmm So we developed this product actually for a general population. And so when we studied it on healthy people. We studied it on people that had kind of syndrome X or metabolic syndrome, to see, what the results would be. And so in this particular study that I'm talking about here, this was not done on athletes. This was done on a general population where they take one capsule in the morning and one in the evening, and it showed in real time how it reduced the reactive oxygen species load in their body. But as we know, engaging in regular exercise has a lot of health benefits.
Right.
Reduced
Right.
risk of heart disease, improved mood, stronger bones, better blood flow. But when it comes
And
to training, yeah, athletes, there is a detrimental effect if you can't actually balance this free radical load.
right, right. And I was just about to say, I mean, athletes, as we train, I mean, some of the stress and response signaling does allow us to, uh, to get rid of those free radicals a little bit better. So our body is equipped to do that as well, even though we need these, exogenous materials to help us with that.
Right.
Is that correct? Yeah.
Right.
Um, and so this, similar to alt red, is a catalyst in order to achieve that. It seems like.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So is there, so for athletes in particular, is there any athletes that maybe would not benefit from this? Or as I'm looking at the 20% reduction in ROS, 42% reduction in mitochondrial RS, is there a time period where athletes should not be taking this?
Again, this is it's really the spectrum of different phytochemicals that are helping just balance what we would say balance or have a healthy um, antioxidant free radical homeostasis needed
Mhm.
for good health and performance gains. I mean, one of the things you see is that, the more you stress your body out, the more chance you have to be sick and and catch
Mhm.
something
Mhm.
and
Absolutely.
start to get run down. So anything you can do as kind of a maintenance baseline level of healthy phytochemicals that are going to balance your free radical antioxidant homeostasis, is going to be beneficial. And again, the more diverse your diet is, the more plant based your diet is, you're going to have an advantage. Um, and so a lot of it depends what your diet is and how well you eat and that kind of thing too, how well you sleep. But this is another way or another tool to manage that oxidative stress in addition to diet and sleep.
Gotcha. And the reason I bring it up, and you can uh, disagree with me or correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember we used to work a lot with Dr. Stacy Sims, and a lot of her recovery products when she created Osmo was free of antioxidants and like extra stuff because
Hmm.
effectively initially after exercise we want to get some carbohydrate in, we want to get some protein and some hydration. That's it.
Right. Correct.
Then let if you're going to eat antioxidants, and you should eat antioxidants, I'm not saying that, but the timing of it is actually important. You know eh, don't chalk yourself full of antioxidant stuff post workout right away.
Hmm.
So I would say probably don't take this with your recovery smoothie post workout.
No, that's why
Okay.
we recommend just
Okay.
take one capsule in the morning when you get out of bed and one
Yeah.
before you go to bed at night. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. And if you exercise in the morning, if you train in the morning, would you, is it cool to take one of these before you work out?
Uh, I think it's better to take it before than after,
Hmm.
but
I would agree with that. Yeah.
you, yeah, it's really individual. I can't say across the board what would be the best plan. Again, it kind of
Might be
depends on
splitting hairs there.
your own goals. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, might be splitting hairs there, but
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. In overall, I mean, it uh, sounds like an incredible product for sure, and I'm curious to learn a bit more. I will be frank with everybody here. I have not read these studies that he has sent over, but with the alt red and with the immunity, I will link to all of these clinical research articles in our show notes afterwards. So, Jeff, I'll get those, especially the immunity, from you before we wrap.
All right.
So before we go, I do want to talk about safety and quality because more and more athletes are not only wanting to know what they're putting into their bodies, but they want to know where it's coming from, how it's made, the quality of it, and any other environmental considerations. So, Jeff, for those say professional Olympic bound athletes that are listening to this and they're like, I don't want USADA knocking on my door. Or if you're the weekend warrior, that's like, well, cool, but like I want to know where this stuff is coming from. What can you say to those athletes that are curious about the product, but maybe have some hesitation on where this is coming from?
Hmm. Hmm. Fair question. For our products that we're producing, this product's actually produced at our Futureceuticals facility. Um, Everything is obviously GMP, FDA inspected, every kind of quality certification. But in addition to that, we have third party certifications specifically for athletes. So all of these products are NSF certified, safe for sport. And so every single
Perfect.
batch that we produce has to be tested for every single banned substance in the world. And so it's a pretty extensive testing protocol that each lot of material has to go through. And it not only, uh, you know, protects us, but I mean, even if we, for example, buy capsules to put the product in,
Mhm.
I mean, we might know that our product is safe, but what about the capsule? What about the bottle? What about the little piece of cotton that goes into the bottle? There's just no
Mhm.
way to guarantee that it's actually free of banned substances unless you test the finished product for banned substances. So we even here could do a perfect job, and we'll be like, of course we couldn't have a contaminant in the product, but we're not in control of capsule production. And
Mhm.
how do you know for sure if there's some kind of cross contamination and then we also do a second certification, which is informed sport. And that's a similar certification. So we kind of have two certifying bodies that we use and have a dual certification to make sure that it's safe for any athlete. And then as far as sourcing the material, that's also another very important thing. And so the source of all of our raw materials, we have a very strict quality approval process for every supplier of every ingredient that we make here at Futureceuticals. And so every supplier is audited, visited. We have to understand everything about their production process, the quality of the company, the quality of the people. You obviously have to trust your partners implicitly. And so that's something that's very important to us, is to really have relationships with the suppliers we have and understand everything about their business and their values, because without trust and knowing where the product's actually coming from, uh, you could be told anything and it may not end up to be true.
That's exactly it, which is why I wanted to ask the question, because it does seem like, especially in this space of any, supplement of sorts, it's just many people can get in the game very easily, and it is not so easily known where the stuff is coming from. So I'm glad to hear that you've taken that extra, not only step, the extra mile, in order to do that. And you've been in this industry for a year. I mean, literally generations,
Yeah.
not only years.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's good to hear.
We've kind of seen it all, and
Yeah.
some of it's not good.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Well, like I said in my intro, it's this is a different style of podcast, I think, than I've done before, talking about a product. In the end, that's what we did. We talked about two products. But I hope what our listeners learned was, a lot of science and a lot of why and a lot of understanding of how betalains are, separate from beetroot in particular, and how, alt red and betalains can help in their pursuit of endurance performance. And so I certainly learned a lot as well. And, our listeners are addicted to improving themselves in every facet of the way. But if you could maybe summarize, your key points of what you want our listeners to glean from this conversation, Jeff, how would you summarize our conversation today?
Yeah, I would summarize it by saying that, um, we're here to help athletes on their journey with pure, studied, efficacious supplements. I would challenge anybody who wants to test this product out for themselves to try it. And a vast majority of the people that take this product are believers. And so it may not work for you, but it works for a lot of people with pretty dramatic results. Don't believe everything you read and that's marketed to you. Uh, I guess I would say that. And no supplement will make up for hard work, good diet, enough sleep. You know, it won't make it any easier,
That's
although
true.
it
Although
might
your
feel
perceived effort
easier.
might come down.
Might feel easier, and hopefully you do go a lot faster. So
That's right. That's right. Well, great, Jeff. Thank you so much for taking time. If our listeners want to check out your alt red or immunity, should we send them over to the website? And what is that?
Yeah, the website is sur.co, sur.co.
Pretty simple, sir.co. And I will link to that in our show notes as well. And on the socials, you guys are on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah,
Okay. And for those Strava members, I think you've got a Strava club as well, right, Jeff?
we do. We do.
Okay. Okay. Well, I will link to that. Any since we are recording, time stamping this just before Thanksgiving, is there any Sir challenges just before the weekend holiday or
There's no Thanksgiving Sir challenges this year. We will have a Strava challenge coming out soon, but
cool?
no challenges right now.
Okay. Well, I will link to all that, including the clinical research, and please go check them out. I think it's worthwhile. But Jeff, thank you so much again for taking your time to help educate us on betalains and blood flow and all the cool stuff.
So my pleasure. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks.